Hello again, and here we go with another old art critique video. Hopefully you've been enjoying these so far. I've really enjoyed going back to some of this old work that I haven't looked at it in a really long time, and I've enjoyed looking at it with a more critical eye, with lessons that I've learned over time from different processes and work and tricks and tips and tools and things that I've learned. So um, it's been fun to go through and see what I would do different now, how I would fix things, seeing some of the stuff that even worked, and kind of charting my progress with comic book art through time with you. So hopefully these are also something that young artists are being able to look at and see and get some tips of their own from, and get some lessons from as well, and how to move ahead and how to get better, and how to improve their own art, because we all go through the process, right, of learning and putting the hours in. And it doesn't come without putting the hours in. And hopefully you could see over the time, as I'm charting when these projects were done, you can see the time and the hours that get put in. So today we're going to look at the next full comic book that I drew from start to finish. And again, the very first video, if you watch them in order, the very first one showed a comic book I did when I was in middle school in 1988, I think it was. And now here, this book is one that I drew over. Actually, it took a couple of years back and forth, but I would say probably started in about 2000, early 2004, and probably finished somewhere in 2005, maybe 2006. Um, so that's what I want to show you, and we're going to go through some of the pages and talk about what I did and how I do it different. So let's set up the art and get going. Okay, here we go. And as I've been doing with some of the more recent videos, because again, the art is bigger, you can see I've zoomed out so you can get the full size. And then as I talk about details or individual panels, I'll go ahead and zoom in so we can talk about stuff. But these, again, so here we go. As I mentioned at the end of the last video, we're going to start talking less about the tools, because by this time I've started to get more consistent with using the right kinds of paper and pencils and pens that are working for me in terms of producing comic book art that can be reprinted. So what we've got here, we're still working on the 11 by 17 blue lined comic book boards, and I'm working at this point now with the felt tip, more the what we call the Micron is the brand, not a sponsor. Micron pens to do my line art. Some of the solid black areas are still, I think, being filled in with maybe Sharpie felt markers. But again, not a big deal in terms of reprinting. By this time, I've got a computer. I can scan things. I can adjust it to make it the black as dark and consistent as I want it to be. So let's talk about the book real quick. By this time, I had again been working with artists or with writers on the internet. I had somebody I had met online and had become friends with, and had helped him with a couple of his projects, some character designs, some I think he uses a back cover for one issue, an image on a website, stuff like that. And so he came and said, basically at that point, boy, I'd really like to work on a project with you. So he asked me, what kind of story would you like to draw? So when he asked me what did I want to draw, my answer came from my thought process was, how do I find something that I could draw that's easy on myself? Cities are very hard. I've discussed that before, right? Cityscapes and lots of buildings and perspective and all that stuff, very difficult. Cars can be very difficult. And again, this was the early 2000s, so I wasn't by that time as comfortable with Google Images and trying to find references online and stuff like that for vehicles. So I said, let's do a fantasy story, right, with swords and magic and things like that. I thought it would be easier. I think you'll see in the pages. It wasn't. So what we've got here is sort of in the story an early, it's not quite a flashback, but it's the prologue, right? Is that the beginning, the prologue? Or is it the prologue at the end? Anyway, this is the beginning story, sort of giving us the backstory of what's going on in this world that we're going to be examining. And it starts off with these people are at war, and it goes for a long time, and it's a big battle, but the battle is finally over, and the good guys get to go home. So what we're doing here is we're establishing sort of what that looks like. So we've got our motley crew of good guys, and of course our main character here is in the middle, and then this guy becomes a central character in the story, and then we filled it in with just some random characters, and then they're fighting soldiers here and fighting hard and winning, and then we can see the end result and what happens. And some of the characters have made it through, banged up, but made it through, and here we are. So looking at it, it's not bad. We got the up close with the faces lined up. Could have done more of an establishing shot, maybe further out with the two armies where you could see them all. But I think you get an idea, right, that this is some sort of a group of warriors. Tried to kind of pack it in so it would seem like there's a lot of people, arrows flying and people getting hacked up and all that. So the chaos of the war. So we've zoomed out and seen that, and then boom to the quiet moment. Maybe again. So at this point, kind of a middle figure is again sort of this big, and then here he's sort of here. Could have maybe pulled this guy into the foreground more. Obviously, I wanted to show the whole thing of him, kneeling down, being weary, planting his sword because he's done fighting, he's won finally, but it cost, and the people in the background. Not bad. I'm not hating it. Lots of rendering, lots of shading, fairly consistent on the lighting, I think. Could be a little more clear in the background, right? This black in the center is just supposed to help, I think, show us that this is a foreground, middle ground, and then this is to drop it behind, but it's a little stark. It's very dark black, like it's a chasm or a hole or something like that. So maybe something else would have worked in that a little better. But overall, not crazy bad page, not crazy. And then we'll pull back and we'll see that again, story-wise, the hero here is broken out of his musings at the end of the war. He's crying, people have died, and we have the soldier with the white flag from the other forces has come to surrender. We have people cheering, yay, and his buddy's telling him, hey, cool, we can go home. And then when you see them here, you can tell, right, these are the same guys, but they've changed their clothes, they've cleaned up. There's a camp, right? There's the army camp, and they're all packed up, they're heading home. They're done with the war. So, not too bad. Turning because he's hearing a noise. So, honestly, I'm working here from full script. So the writer has told me there's a panel of this character hearing, approaching or hearing voices or something. So that's, what I showed. I don't know that you need this. Just having this guy, or maybe, storytelling wise, what I think would even be better would be somebody pointing like, hey, there's a rider approaching, right? So maybe a little rider in the background in the dust and somebody going, hey, someone's coming. And then you see this guy with the white flag. Otherwise, he's just here. That I think might have worked better than this face of him turning. But it works in terms of this, and where the eyes are pointed takes you here to this panel, to these guys. And again, I'm okay with this little insert here. I'm still doing, you'll see profiles, fairly large amount of profiles. So that's one of the things that a lot of comic book artists struggle with, I think, early on. I know I did, and I see it often in young work, is when you have two people talking to each other and you want to show both people, how do you show two people talking without having one person always looking at one person's back? How do you show both faces when they're talking to each other? And so you have to come up with creative ways to do it. And so in this case, one of them is to show, well, this is profile. He's talking to him, when in reality, there's no reason that this guy could not have still been in this exact same position and his buddy been slightly behind, facing the camera and doing more of a 3/4 or a view. When you talk about faces, they're the two most dull or boring images to show is the profile and the straight on face, because it doesn't create any kind of space or dimension or depth to it. It's very flat. To try to draw a face in 2 dimensions looking straight at you, it flattens it out. Same thing with the profile, because all you see is that eye on the side, and it just becomes very flat. Whereas here you can see there's an eye, the nose sort of overlaps the other eye. You see one ear, but not the other. The hair is overlapped by the face. This creates this guy exists in 3 dimensions. This guy becomes very flat. So anyway, that's something, again, that I see a lot in artists who are still learning and need to figure it out. And here I was doing the exact same thing. And now they're heading out. The one thing I will say, again, and I've mentioned this in another video, is the panel borders. So here, this is a pretty reasonable gutter between these panels. You've got this black. I've used black because I think it's supposed to be at night, right? We see the moon, so it's at night, and it's war, and it's all this kind of stuff. And then you'll see as we move forward, they lighten up. That size right there is pretty reasonable. Gives us a good, clear definition between this image and this image. These are really thick. I don't know why I was doing them so thick, but again, I've never seen anything in writing that I'm aware of that says panel gutters equal 1/8 of an inch or 1/16 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch or whatever the size is. I think it doesn't, there's no right or wrong, but boy, these are awfully thick. And you give yourself, it doesn't sound like much, but you cut, 1/8 of an inch here and there and stuff when you're talking, when the whole thing is only maybe 3 inches wide, 3 by 3, 1/8 of an inch on either side, can make a difference. So I think I would do that a little differently, but that's where it is. Oh, last thing, I just, before I just talked about referencing and photo references and stuff like that. I didn't want to do cities and cars and things, but I can tell you, I absolutely used a photo of a guy on a horse looking up at the horse to do this. The difference is, of course, I just turned it into this weird dragon-y lizard horse thing for some reason instead of a regular horse, because this isn't supposed to be, 200 years, not 200 years ago. This isn't supposed to be 500 years ago or even 1,000 years ago. This is supposed to be before time, right? That kind of like, almost like Conan type of, before there was time, there was Conan. So, that kind of a thing. So instead of drawing a regular horse, I made it, some sort of monster horse. Okay, so what we've got here is we've got the main characters are now traveling home, and they're traveling home by foot. They've been to war. And while they're traveling, we're taking the time to, again, give the backstory of how everything came to be and why they came to be at war to begin with. Now, why one character would need to explain to the other is beyond me. I don't know. You would think they would both know why they're in war, but again, I didn't write it. But this was just a way to get the readers up to speed on why were these guys fighting in this war against another kingdom. And so we've got some forest, not too bad in the first panel, except again, cutting off some feet. Yeah, no reason to cut off some feet, especially here, like right at the ankle. Like, don't do that. It would be very easy to just tilt the camera up a little bit to look down at them slightly, and you'd see the ground that they're walking on, and you can still see that there's, maybe they're walking through a path and there's bushes in the foreground, and you've got a middle ground with some trees and canopy, and then a nice rolling hill in the background. So you can do the depth, that's fine, and frame them within the foliage, but just cutting them off at the ankles and the feet is no good. It's just an excuse to not draw feet, I guess. and way too many of us fall into that trap. And then here again, this is some sort of this was written where it's, they pass through and they're talking about farming and how it was friendly and and there were people who just lived off the land and everything was cool. And then eventually this evil king, wants to claim it all for himself. So that's what this is supposed to be. Like, this isn't supposed to be a cave or something. This is supposed to be, these guys are talking, and this is sort of that visual motif of what they're talking about, just in black and white, without any dialogue, without any color to show sort of a flashback color or something like that. I don't know that it reads that great. Certainly the transition from black to not, you can see I tried to do it through the cross hatching there, but I didn't go hard enough. I didn't commit to that cross hatching. It should basically be, you put so many lines that the lines become black, and then you thin out the lines until they're no longer black so that it truly blends. You shouldn't have a hard line there with that. That being said, I like the silhouette, using a silhouette and a framing technique. A little big on the negative space, but this is a lot of exposition, right? The whole purpose of this is telling the story and using dialogue and words to do it. So that being said, I've left space there for this. I'm gonna chalk it up to that, and not just a bad use of the space on my part. Otherwise, if you don't have to worry about the dialogue, this would be bigger. Don't leave this much negative space there. It doesn't make any sense. But the framing of the silhouette with the hills in the background is a good storytelling device to use when you can, especially when the detail isn't important, right? I've established in a couple of shots already, this is what these guys look like. We know they're walking through a forest. They're going to walk for several panels or several pages. I don't need to keep redrawing that same thing every time for you to still understand who they are. You see the silhouettes, you know exactly who they are. So to me, my opinion, this is a viable and good storytelling technique when you have that kind of situation. So here we've got a king. He's an evil king, and he's killed his father to take over the throne because he's evil. Drawing someone sitting on a throne straight on, really difficult perspective. And it kind of works. Like, he's an old dude. He has some giant hands, right? And the hands are supposed to be closer to you, so they would be a little bit bigger, but not quite. I don't know if about this much bigger, but definitely not an easy shot to do. It's okay. Again, would it have hurt the storytelling that instead of it being straight on, what if I had drawn it 3/4 view? You still would have seen that his neck has been cut, and that's what that is. There's blood running down him because he's the prince has killed his dad. Now he's wiping off his dagger. You change this to slightly 3/4 so that he's facing the fire. Does it really change the setting so much? No, I don't think so. The other thing here is I've set that there's a fire here, which is why, so part of why he is shadowed so dark, right? That's your light source. It casts, only this far, and there's a shadow in the corner of the room, and it lights up a little bit here and here. So anything in the front of him is going to be pretty dark. I could have even gone a little darker. Also, he's a dark character, right? He's evil, so we put him in very dark space with the shadowing. Makes sense. There's a big cast shadow here from the big stone throne. That's okay. There's not much shadowing on this figure itself. If this is the light source here and it's coming straight across, there should be more shadowing on this side, whether it's this cloak, whether it's on his face, things of that nature. I understand I did line work here to do the inside shading here so that the floor could be black and it wouldn't blend together. Blend it together. It's all shadows. If you have a shadow, if something is in shadow and it's next to something in shadow, sometimes you need to just draw the shadows. Let things blend into the shadows. And to be honest, it's something to this day I still don't necessarily do enough of, and I need to. Otherwise, okay, a lot of stone work, a lot of stone and sort of brick work. You'll see that a lot in these pages. Last thing, reference stuff to give you a little tip, or a little inside baseball, as they say. This guy is supposed to be modeled sort of after, what is his name? Like Max von Sydow from Conan. The Arnold Schwarzenegger Conan movie. This is the guy who hires him to go save his daughter, and he eventually, I think he gets killed as well. But that's who this character is modeled after. And then the crown is, for super nerds, you may recognize it. It is the crown from Transformers the movie, when Starscream becomes the leader of the Decepticons when he thinks Megatron is dead. That's what this crown is modeled after, is that crown, which then gets crushed. Yeah, so super nerd insider stuff. Yeah. Moving on. Okay, so we're still in flashback stuff. And so because we're in flashbacks, and I've gone with more of a 4-panel grid here. Being full script, the writer did, what he would tell me is, in panel 1, you need to show the people being oppressed by the guards, right? By the king's guards. They're taking their money, they're arresting them, they're abusing the citizenry. Then we show the guy lording over everybody as the king, and then these two guys, again, talking more about how there needs to be an uprising, and then talking some more. So he tells me this is what has to happen in the panels. Now, I didn't have to set it up as 4 identical panels, but I think it's one of the things you can do for pacing. When you have an action sequence or something like that that's happening kind of fast, moving your panel sizes, making them really vary and be big, or having panels with no borders, and doing creative stuff can really help move the eye faster through a page when you're doing action stuff. This has a lot of narration over the top. It's telling a story, and if you're listening to someone who's telling a story, there's a certain cadence to the way they talk. They're going to talk and turn a page, and then talk and turn a page. And that's sort of what I'm going for with this. So it's not necessarily the most exciting panel layout of pages, but I think it works for what we're doing. We're just, again, telling stories, giving you that background information and what you need. So we'll zoom in a little bit on each panel and talk about them individually. Castles are hard to draw. You can make them up, but unless you know sort of how it's structured, it needs to have a gate, and in the front there's, the turrets and all that kind of stuff. Like, again, I'm sure that I used some form of a real castle reference when looking for this. Then we see the guards, and we're starting to sow the seeds that things aren't going well. You can see the citizenry is upset. We've got a guy. So here he's taking some money, kind of tax collecting looking, leading. This guy's hands are bound. Could have put him up a little higher to show they've arrested an old man and a guy, but not too bad. From there, you've got a foreground, middle ground, background elements there. Could have maybe shown a little less castle, or could have done the castle much smaller off to the background, brought the figures up a little bit. That wouldn't have been too bad, because what I'm seeing as I'm looking at these two panels side by side is it's both of them are sort of cut right there. So you've got all your foreground, mid-ground stuff here, and your background starts almost at the same place, right? So again, making the castle smaller, making the background slightly further away, which is fine. We haven't established that these people live right outside the castle. It can be as far as we need it to be. But then moving this up a little bit creates a little bit of a different level. Here, these guys, again, could have been slightly bigger, especially the very front guy. If I draw his angry face, you see the sword coming up. We don't need as much of his chest and arm and stuff here. Then you've got a layer of soldiers behind him. That'd be all right, I think, if that came up further, closer a little bit. And then him in the back holding his hands up. He's got his little ladies with him. They could have been inked a little darker to help them pop out from his cloak. Also, I could tell, I knew this was colored. When it got printed, the pages were colored digitally, and I knew they were going to be colored. And so I think I left some things for that. So like what I would have done if this is going to just in black and white, or I don't know what the color is going to be, I definitely would have put some sort of a rendering behind this cloak to add some to depth, to push it back further behind him and behind the girls to the side. I've also mentioned it before, where I still, to this day, I still feel like if you just use solid blacks as your shadows without any rendering coming off of it, and again, that could be feathering or cross hatching or whatever, it feels, to me, it makes things feel shiny or plasticky. Like here, right? So he's got a piece that kind of, that like classic, surf or medieval citizen, right? Where it goes across the shoulders. It's like a, piece that's pulled over the top, and there's fabric underneath it. So there's a shadow there. That's great. There's a cast shadow. The light's coming down and it overhangs. So there's a shadow, but there's no feathering of that shadow or rendering of that shadow. So again, this feels like it's very hard. Like, again, and that's how things like plastic, metal, leather, anything kind of shiny has reflections. The shadows are sharp and hard. Soft cloth, if you look at it outside in the sun, it doesn't have all of that crazy, hard shadowing there. So that's that. This one was interesting. I liked it. So here's we've done a different camera angle, straight down, which is great. They're crossing some rocks on a river, and you can see the water's foaming around the rocks here. It's flowing that way. And in the flow of the river, we see, because they're talking about how the revolution began and people were getting fired up and called to arms. So we've got people raising fists and raising their farming tools and a torch, and that's all done in the sort of a reflection in the water, right? To go along with what the dialogue is saying. I love this. I think this works great. I know it's very simple, and it might seem weird. The only thing, looking at it now, that I would do differently is I would change the direction of the guys. So right now they're walking this way, and that sort of pulls you, as you're reading it, there's motion that way. You want the motion coming this way to bring the reader to this panel, especially because everything so far in all the panels that we've shown them, they're walking from left to right, wherever they're going. There's no reason for them now to go right to left. So it's as simple as literally just going and drawing them facing the other direction. This all flow can go. This can be here, no problem. It's just now they're crossing this way instead of this way. That's the only thing I would do. And in fact, you could probably do this. Easiest thing would be, now you go into Photoshop, you could select this panel, right? If you were good and just select it just along the border, and you could tell Photoshop, flip it vertically, right? No. Yeah. And anyway, flip it so that it would now flip like that, and it'd be fixed, and now they'd be walking in the right direction. So last panel on the page here, they're walking, and they're starting to get back towards home. There's people who are waving because they recognize them. Hey, we haven't seen you. This is old couple. Hey, old couple, we're heading home. And we've got some nice shadow on the tree. It looks like there's, this is a road or a walking path, some grass. Cool. The only thing I would say here is I don't need to cheap out on the background. So what I've done, and it's hard to read without color, and that's the problem. All this black area back here is supposed to be some sort of hedge, bush, trees, whatever, because you can see in the back, here's the mountains and hills in the background, way back. Now you can shade in here. That just doesn't all have to be drawn per se, because these guys could get lost if you just left it as, just drawing some bushes and lots of leaves and stuff. There's going to be a lot of line work and stuff. And these guys could get lost a little bit in it, but there's also no need to black it out so much that it reads, again, like, is this, like, this part here and here almost looks like this could be the leaves of the trees, and you're not seeing through it, so it doesn't read what it is, which is bushes and stuff here in that background. So this needs to be drawn out a little bit as opposed to just left as black. So that's one of the things I would do different there. So here we go to the next page. Okay. Okay, so with this page, we've skipped ahead in the story a little bit, but I wanted to show it because it has this montage component to it. And I think there's some interesting stuff to kind of talk about here. So this is the idea of there are five. So there's five members of this party, and they're all sort of gearing up to go to the point where they're gonna try to rescue one of the characters and go on this quest adventure, right? So we've got this guy. So when you first meet him, he's all wrapped up. So we're showing him, he's unwrapping these wrappings. So you see all these, he's like a wizard. So you see all the tattoos that cover his body. We have an elfin archer, and so she's stringing up her bow. We've got One of these guys is from the original pages, one of the warriors, and he's getting down his armor and his sword and his shield. You can see in the back he's taking down the sword from over the fireplace. We have a minotaur. He's putting on these straps that go across his body. This ends up being our main character, and he's putting his armor and stuff back on. And then we have the wizard again, and he's ready to go. And then the next page, we have a shot of the whole team. So the reason I wanted to do it is a couple of reasons why I wanted to look at this page. For one, again, this is a 6-panel grid, very classic layout for comics. The gutters in the panels are much smaller, make much more sense, much more in line with what I would be looking at today, and what I would be doing. All the panels are basically pretty much, I think, the exact same size. So you have, this guy with the face. The key here is we're starting to see what he looks like for the first time because he's been all wrapped up and hooded kind of before. The close-up of the bow and the arrows becomes big because this character, that's a big part of what she does, and you can tell it's her. We've seen her before in terms and the hands and stuff we know. This guy, again, a character, we see him, he's putting his shield on. The Minotaur is easy to tell because he's so furry. This character here, again, with the armor that calls back to the very first page, and then here. So the parts where in the panels, we'll go in and we'll actually look at it as a flow here from the start. Kind of a larger shot, not quite a full giant close-up, but larger, definitely into a detail of the hands here. Medium shot, very similar, not too far off in terms of size. And then another big close-up with hands, more almost a full figure, not quite, and again, same size. This needs to be varied up more. So from a storytelling standpoint, the page doesn't have a movement to it. The images don't have kind of an in-out flow. Nothing takes your eye from page to page to page to page, or to panel to panel to panel to panel across. There's a lot of stuff where you go, well, why? So if I start here, and this is a good panel. So here well, one more thing before I zoom in. The use of the black areas of the panels can be used to balance the page if you look at it as a whole. So you're not looking at any particular image. You're imagining you're sort of squinting your eyes and just looking at this as shapes of black and white, and where is it anchored and where is it heavy and balanced and all that. I've got heavy black sort of backgrounds here and here in the corners. So that's not too bad because that kind of balances out where you've got it. In essence, you're putting the light, there's no real spotlight in the image, but you're putting a spotlight around this character, a spotlight around here, focusing around these hands. Trying to focus on the character here, it falls a little short. So that part is okay. But again, there are some choices here that could be made differently that would help the flow of the page. So we're going to go into the panels. Not bad, good detail. Again, I mentioned it earlier. The straight-on face isn't always the most exciting way to draw a face. A 3/4 face, just turning the head, tilting the head a little bit feels more real. Tilting the head down in this panel feels more real. Certainly 3/4 turn gives the face more depth. So you can still do it at this size. You can still show the unwrapping. It doesn't have to be looking straight at the viewer. You turn it one way or the other. And by doing that might help, again, with that idea of visual images that help you flow from panel to panel. There's a little bit, right, of like this arm flows to this arm, flows here, and then this doesn't come over. This kind of brings you here, and then you got to backtrack, so it's a little weird. Anyway, You could leave this as it is. It's perfectly good panel, not a problem, works, tells the story, you're good. Here, we want to do a close-up of the hand with the bow, the string, and the arrows. This, again, unless there's space being left specifically for dialogue, which I don't remember in the script that it says that this page has a ton of dialogue, this could absolutely, this space could all be used up. I could zoom in much tighter on the hands. You'd still know who it is. There's only one woman in the group, so by making the hands a little feminine or adding the bracelet design element that she has, the bow and arrows alone, the bow could be overlapping the quiver a little bit, so it'd be a lot easier to pull that in and be really tight on those hands and still know who it is. Also, there's no shading on these bracelets. So there's some sort of a bracelet, metal bracelet that goes over her arm, sort of loose, and it jingles around as she goes. But they don't cast any shadows whatsoever. There's a shadow here, which kind of indicates, and there's a shadow here that the light's coming from above. So these should be casting some sort of a shadow underneath on her arm, and that would help give those weight and again, depth and volume to the arm. And then I also wouldn't have had to fill in the background with a whole bunch of random trees for no reason. Also, this is sort of a tangent right about here. The tops of these arrows with the feathers blends in with sort of this random shape of the bush, and it doesn't break it up as much. So zooming way in would definitely help on that one. Here, we've got the guy, and he's getting ready, but then it's very similar to here. So maybe flip-flopping these panels could have helped, so that if I'm going to do a close-up on hands and a close-up on hands, don't do it on the same side. Do it person, hand, hand, person, to give you kind of a boom variation. Again, just sort of figuring out how do you make things creative for your eyes. Fireplace, again, so earlier page we saw there was a fireplace. The fireplace is not just heat, but a real source of light, and we don't see that on him. It doesn't seem to be casting a lot of light. There's a little bit of shadow around the fireplace here, but not enough. So his face, and it's hard because you want to show the character. You want to show the details of the face and costume and stuff, so you don't want it to be completely blacked out silhouette. But obviously we've set up a fire, which is a very strong and single point of light. This isn't a time when there's lamps or overhead lights or things like that in a house, so this is going to be a source of light. So if you don't want the character's face to all be in shadow, it's very simple. You just change the camera angle. There's no previous storytelling of showing him in this position, so I could have drawn him facing any way I want, including facing the fire, right? So I could have turned it, I could have put it where you could see maybe the edge of the fireplace, or just have him facing the fire, lots of light on his front. You could shadow the back, shadow the room behind him. The fireplace, to my knowledge, I don't remember. I don't think it was a critical part of the story either. It was just me filling in a background so you could see he's taking down the sword from over the fireplace. That I could absolutely do in a number of different ways, but the lighting would have been more consistent. So again, flipping, better lighting on here to reflect what's going on. The last couple pages, this one is okay, but it wouldn't have killed me if I wanted to zoom out far enough that you could see, again, the whole figure. It would have been small, and some of the detail would have been gone, but the overall shape of the figure and the details of the cape and armor, I think, would have still read, and the sword, right? I really emphasize, so again, this is the same idea. This is a callback to the character from the first page, and one of the things that we really emphasize in the first page is this design of this sword. So in the story up before here, you see where he has shaved his beard and cut his hair. So that's all part of the narrative, so that you still recognize that this is the same guy, but with a shave and a haircut. But the sword is the same. And the sword is a big deal here. And here's that same sword. And so between the sword, the costume, I could have shrunk him down to be full-sized as opposed to being basically the exact same size as this guy and almost the same size as this guy here. So that's something that could have been done differently. And then here, he is done taking off these ceremonial robes and wrappings, and now he's going to speak to the team. Again, center of the page, standing very stoic, very stiff, boring. The head is turned, the body's not a little turned. Again, tons of ways to do this differently, and as well. So they're gathering outside of this guy's house is part of the story. So there's bushes and stuff behind him, but I've drawn it where so if this guy's going to be a lot smaller, this guy could be bigger. So maybe you are only seeing his head, his face, his torso right here. And I wouldn't have to fill in all this space with background. Now, again, his mouth is open. Maybe I'm leaving room for dialogue. But to be honest, you can put dialogue over anything. It doesn't have to 100% have this just blank open space. It's not a big deal. So anyway, this guy could be zoomed way in more, and then you have more fluctuation to the story. You have the panels are all the same, but the view inside the panels isn't as similar, and that would have really helped make it a more interesting page. And then again, the bushes and stuff are fine, but the way it lines up kind of with his head really doesn't read well. Make him bigger. If you want to have some bushes and things to show he's outside, do it lower on him, right? You can show bushes that are down here. They don't have to be kind of line up with his head that way. Doesn't make a lot of sense. So that's how I would do that one differently. Okay, we're almost done. This is the last page I want to look at. And here we have, again, some storytelling stuff where they are now riding some of those lizard horse things through the woods. They're going to head to the bad guy's castle. This guy is communicating to his buddy. They're heading through the woods. They talk about, we've got a plan. And they're like, sure, we're just going to bust through the front gate. And this guy's like, what? Are you crazy? So storytelling, here's some things I like, and some things, that need some work. So this big panel, I like it. I like the way it works, where everybody is shown pretty well on the lizard horsey things. The Minotaur kind of blazing a trail in the front, reads kind of around like this. I'm good with that. I like the panel doesn't go all the way to the top of the page, so that this insert here is kind of on top of it, and you can, with the overlap of those lines, makes it look like it's on top of it, which again, I'm comfortable with. Now, what I don't remember again from the script is, does stuff happen here first? Is this being read from here to here? If you get from here to here, it's hard to then get to here. And this is where, we do, as Western readers, we read from left to right, up to down. Excuse me. So my question would be, if this is the first panel and this is supposed to come first, it really should be over here. And then you could still have most of the other figures here and the Minotaur in the front. If this dialogue comes first, then to this, then to this might have been better off being positioned here, right? And then that way you're going to read whatever dialogue's here. You're going to have something here. It's closer to this panel, and it takes us here, 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 which makes more sense. So depending on what's supposed to happen, either way, this panel, I like it. I like the way it flows around, but it doesn't read that great. for storytelling purposes, really should be in a different position, either maybe here or here. That being said, whatever way you want to do it, again, this is, panel with a lot of people and a lot of stuff going on. There's way too much negative space. There may be tons of word balloons, but man, all this tree and all this background stuff, do I need it? Do you need to show all of that? You can still show trees, right? We can show where they branch off, and we show some leaves to show that they're riding through the forest. That part is okay. But do I still tell the same story with that much space as opposed to that much space? And if I'm only going to do that much space, that means these figures could be larger in the background, or I could have, again, depending on where I'm going to put this first panel or second panel, if I'm going to put it over here, I could move them all up. And then you've got space over here. These guys would have been bigger and up here, and then the Minotaur's still here. So you still have the storytelling you need with a better use of the space. There's also, right, so, and even with dialogue, I've got space here. I don't have to show all this. I've got space here. If I move this over, I've got space here. There's plenty of ways to put in dialogue. You're not worried about it. This one's not too bad for a front end shot. I like the figures with their heads turned. You've got the lizard horsey things foreground. They're clearly overlapping to put them behind, and then he's behind that. I like the tilt of his head. That part's cool. Now this is where, yeah, there is some space here that's been left for dialogue. That's why there's no background. There is some space here. Maybe it may overlap a little bit. It may overlap some of the horse face. It may even overlap into the bubble, into the panel above a little bit over. I'm totally okay with that because that works, but I haven't created a whole giant blank space where you either have to fill it with dialogue or color or something. It doesn't work. So I'm okay with this. I would say from an inking standpoint, some of the lines on like the reins and where the lizard horse thing's body is versus the saddle versus this guy's legs could be a little better defined to help separate these three shapes. There's a lot of lines going on. You really want to shape them out. And that's where maybe some heavier shading back here under the sort of chest of the lizard horse thing and its neck could help set this guy and his horse back behind these guys. And then here, so this is really a time where it's a moment, right? And you can see just these faces are just slightly closer than these were. They're slightly bigger because they're riding forward towards you. And he is slightly smaller because he is stopped because he's like, what are you talking about? The only thing, there's no need for the sunburst, right? His face shows plenty of surprise and crazy. And he's like, what are you guys talking about? Right. And they're kind of wryly smiling like, hey, we're just going to knock on the front gate. And he's going, what? This motif just isn't needed. And I do it and I don't know where it comes from. I know there's artists that have used it, and certainly I don't think it's very popular these days. So it's something I saw somewhere growing up, but it's just not, it doesn't make sense. It's not needed. It's just an added element just to add it. I would absolutely take that out if I was going to redo that at this point these days. So yeah, and then the last thing I'll say, again, these panels are sort of they're larger. They're not larger than the one above, but everything is sort of a different size. So I've added this. You can see there's this black element behind this panel to make these two pop out like it's on top of that black border. That is absolutely 100% okay. I don't have a problem with it as a panel technique. The only thing I would do differently is cut this in then, right? Because this lines up exactly with this panel. So it looks like this panel like whatever happens below the Minotaur is just black. Like it doesn't read as a separate element. So if you make this black part not quite as wide, then it just becomes a coloring part that this is on top of and this is on top of. And that would make more sense to me. So that's the last change I would make there. So there we go. There is some pages. Now this book ended up being gigantic. I think it was something in the realm of 30 to 40 pages, maybe more, to tell the story. We really got into it. This page alone here is page 23, and there's quite a bit of story left to go, so there was a whole lot there. Eventually, we did print copies of the book and got it into people's hands, which was a lot of fun. So much learning. Originally, there was going to be an inker. There was going to be somebody who was described to me as a professional inker who had worked for a large publisher in the past. And then in my own hubris, when I saw their inking, you could tell they were doing brush inking. I wasn't happy with it. I didn't like the way they translated my pencils. And I said, nope, I'm going to do it myself. And man, did I learn a lesson. But to this day, I pretty much ink all of my own stuff. And I've learned how to work. This project helped me develop my process. I got down to a point where I could do a full page pencil and ink in 8 hours. So in one business day and one work day, I could do a full page. I learned a lot, and then you could definitely tell between the early pages all the way to the end, a lot of the storytelling gets more exciting, gets better. You can see development as you go, and that's it. That putting the time in is the only way to get better and to make those changes. And sitting down and drawing the pages. So you've got to go through, 100, 200 bad pages before you really start getting to the good stuff, I think. And so we're getting there. I've put in the time. Things are getting better, and it's interesting. So next time, I'm going to be showing you some more pages. These go back to being penciled. The next pages will be from a project that did get completed as well. And this was inked by a professional, which really came out great. Those inks look better than I ever thought they could be. But this sort of showed that next writer and publisher what I could do, and they wanted to work with me on their next project, and that was another book, another long 40-page book. But we'll go over a few of those pages next time, see the progress and what I learned from this and what I took over to the next one. I hope you've enjoyed it. Again, thank you for sticking around for the video. Please let me know any of your thoughts, anything that you may want to see in the future. I will be concluding my series of old art critiques and then looking and seeing what we want to do moving forward, what kind of videos may be interesting, or what sort of lessons people might have, or maybe questions that I could address through a live video or a video like this showing, taking people's things and actually maybe drawing on camera and showing you what we're talking about. So again, thank you very much for checking it out. I really appreciate it. And I'll be talking to you soon.